Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, a special double-header Saturday edition of the podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Our guests today are returning to the show. They are part of the CatholicTeenBooks.com group. We'll be speaking with Carolyn Astfalk and Amanda Lauer. We have so many great things happening here on the Reading with Your Kids podcast. So many fantastic guests coming up. In the next week, we're going to have Julian Reeve is going to be on. He was a music director for the touring company of the play Hamilton. He'll be on. Lori Olinsky will be returning to the show to celebrate her brand new book in our Earth Day series, Protecting the Planet with Your Kids. We'll have a brand new episode of Protecting the Planet with Your Kids coming out. Also, you don't want to miss an episode. So like we said before, please be sure to subscribe to the show. And also, we'd love it if you could connect with us on social media. Facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Jedley Magic on Twitter, at Reading with Your Kids on Instagram. And of course, we would love it if you go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, and sign up for our newsletter. Joining us on the line right now from Appleton in Wisconsin. When I hear that name, I've never been to Appleton, but I just envision this lovely town with trees and blossoms all over the place. We'll find out if my imagination is true. Please welcome to the show the author of Anything But Groovy and the Civil War Heaven Intended series. Please welcome Amanda Lauer. Amanda, welcome to the Reading with Your Kids podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm super excited to talk to you today.
I'm excited to have you here. Amanda's been on the show before. She was on the show with the authors from CatholicTeenBooks.com. They were celebrating their St. Patrick's anthology, kind of dedicated to St. Patrick, which was a part of their Treasures, Visible and Invisible series. Before we start talking about your books, I got to ask you about Appleton. Am I right? As I'm looking in my mind about Appleton, am I seeing tree-lined streets with blossoms and flowers growing everywhere?
You know, this is one of those Tree City USA things or something. There are trees everywhere. And when you go up, we don't have a lot of tall buildings here, but when you go up to the top of some of them, it's amazing just to see the tree line. So yeah, we have trees everywhere. It's beautiful. Spring is a little bit away, so we don't have too many blossoms yet. But it's gorgeous here. It's a really beautiful town, and it's a safe town and a nice town. Love it.
That's really cool. Speaking of cool, I have to find out. I have to ask because when I see your title, Anything But Groovy, I love it, but then I also hate it, kind of because like my youth is becoming like a Halloween costume. So tell us about Anything But Groovy.
Yeah. So basically, Anything But Groovy is the story of a 13-year-old from 2021 who gets yanked back in time and has to live her mom's life as a 13-year-old in 1974. And so it's a complete blast from the past. This is a fish out of water story. She grew up in the same house that her mom grew up in. So she's still in the same house, goes to the same school. She and her mom went to the same Catholic grade school. But all the people who are in the school now were like her mom's friends. And so the interesting thing for this young girl is not only does she's now basically living with her grandma and grandpa, who were her mom's mom and dad, and her uncles are now her nasty older brothers, right? But all her mom's friends are the people she's supposed to be friends with, and she's trying to navigate her way, trying to figure out how to get back to her normal life, which she appreciates a whole lot more after this experience. But still, she's trying not to alter anything either, because she knows what happens in a number of these people's lives as they get older and grow up. So she's trying to just live her mom's life without messing it up too badly, but also get back to her own life. So, but I think a lot of people, a lot of kids enjoy reading it because they can see what life was like for their mom or their dad or their grandma and grandpa back in the 70s. And people my age enjoy it because it's just a blast from the past. There's a lot of pop culture in there that people remember and enjoy. I've gotten so many letters and notes and even handwritten letters from teachers and stuff. Some of the nuns that were my teachers back in grade school literally have contacted me. All the ones who are still alive, they seem to own it. They have the book. And even I was contacted by my 2nd grade teacher, my 5th grade teacher. It's just so fun connecting with people and talking about all these things that people are remembering that they had probably forgotten for a long time.
Wow. So that seems like a lot. It seems so much fun, like you said, connecting with those people from your past. But what an interesting concept. Your teenage 13-year-old daughter goes back and lives your life. And I'm imagining for a parent that could be, if they really think that could happen, part of them might be, that would be kind of fun. And then some others would be, I don't want my kids to know what I was doing when I was 13 or 16 or 19.
Right. Well, I think part of the problem is she didn't realize what her mom all went through back. Her mom was bullied to the point where she was had an ulcer. She couldn't sleep at night. She dreaded going to school. And now this young girl has to go back and live through it. She feels all the physical things. She feels the pain. She feels lost and confused and all the things her mom went through. And of course, she probably wonders, why didn't she tell Grandma and Grandpa? But I think things were different back then. Parents parented differently.
Mm-hmm.
It was more suck it up, that kind of stuff, or whatever. And there's the embarrassment too of being the one that gets picked on in your class, and when everybody else can see it happening and nobody's stepping in to help you. So.
Yeah.
But it does have a redemptive ending, just FYI.
Okay. Immediately, I'm thinking about the conversations that a family could have as they're reading or co-reading this together in those conversations over the dinner table. Has anybody reported back on talking
absolutely.
with their teens?
Yeah, people have said there a lot of people my age who have daughters or granddaughters. They're reading the book, coinciding with their granddaughters and daughters. And some of my friends actually be reading it, one of my best friends, she read it once, and then her daughter was going to get the book, but she's like, wait, I have to read it again, and then I'll share it with you, because she said, I read it so fast the first time, I just couldn't stop reading, but now I want to really go back and really just soak this whole story in. But yeah, it's created a lot of conversations between, moms or dads and their kids. So I think that's beautiful. It's really talk about what was it like growing up? Because I think a lot of us don't have those conversations with our parents. And people my age, I literally got a note from somebody who's my age and she said, I wish I would have had these conversations with my mom. She now has Alzheimer's and we can't have these discussions. I wish I would have asked her, what was it like being a teenager for you growing up? Her mom would have been in the 50s or the 40s, but I think it's really beautiful that this is creating conversations. So I love that part of this whole story.
Yeah. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity for not only just to talk about the memories and what it was like wearing bell bottoms and wearing platform shoes and I look back at some of the pictures of me in high school. My kids can't believe it. But I think it also is an opportunity for parents to be a little vulnerable with their kids, to let their kids know that, hey, I made mistakes. And believe it or not, I think that's really powerful. And I think that's, allowing your kids to see that you weren't perfect, that you made mistakes, can actually make that relationship with your kids stronger. And I think make your role as a parent, as a mentor, even stronger.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And my husband and I have 4 children. They're all young adults now. But I'm waiting for them to all finish reading the book so we can all sit down and talk about it too. Because I think there's a lot of things that they didn't realize happened. I mean, even though it's a book of fiction, some of the things were stories taken from my own life. So, I think that's intriguing to the kids to see what life was like for me as their mom back in the day.
When, as you were writing the book and looking back at the 70s and thinking about that and thinking about the things that happened in your life, was there anything that really surprised you? Any memories that kind of surprised you that you didn't expect to remember?
Well, I guess the thing that parenting was a lot different back then than it was when I was raising my kids when they were little. I mean, we were a lot more hands-on and kind of interesting. Like, you know, I did numerous sports when I was in school, and literally I can only remember one time when one of my parents was actually in the stands watching me play. That would be the day, of course, you didn't wear your helmets back in the day playing softball, and I got beamed in the head running home and got knocked out. The one and only game my mom sees. She sees that happen. But we had so much freedom. It was kind of crazy when you think about it. Like, you came in at night when the lights came on, when the street lights came out. You would leave in the morning and your parents would see you. Basically, you'd stop in for lunch and then you'd be there for dinner, supper at the time as we called it. And, it was just such a different time. And even like the privacy things, you used to have, well, at first we had a party line, so I was happy when that was gone. But when you're on the phone, you could only go as far as that curly cord would take you. And you could not get away from your parents overhearing everything. So it was really hard to, there wasn't the privacy that kids have in this day and age.
Yeah, yes, indeed. I have oftentimes, in my educational magic shows, talked to kids about that difference, you know, the fact that they walk around with this thing in their pocket that not only allows them to talk to their friends who live down the street. I mean, you probably remember this, the idea that you were going to make a telephone call where you actually had to use 1 and then the area code. You didn't do that because that costs about $100 for a call. But you know, now the kids have that, you know, they can call anywhere in the world. They can send video anywhere in the world. They can do what you and I are doing right now, actually see each other, have a video conversation. Yeah. And meanwhile, just 50 so years ago, it was, yeah, you had to sit at the kitchen table and talk to your buddies while everybody was there in the room with you. Well,
to really age myself and to show what a small town I lived in, we only had 5 digits. My number was 33019. That was it. So less things to memorize too. But yeah, you had to memorize them, right?
Yep.
Get out a phone book and look up somebody's phone number, right?
Mm-hmm. I just had a conversation with my niece who was 17, and she said to me, is it true that you guys used to have a phone book where everybody's number was listed? And I'm like,
and their address?
And their address, yeah. And I'm like, yeah. She's like, why in the world would you have that? Well, you need to call someone and find out. That's wonderful. What a cool trip down memory lane. Tell us about a Civil War Heaven Intended series. Tell us all about that.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of an interesting thing because I've had a career as a journalism for a long, long time, and I love to read. I have read historic romance books basically since I was probably in 8th grade. The thing I love history, so that's why I loved reading them. But the thing I didn't like about historic romance is all the ones that I read were like what they call the bodice rippers, you know, kind of I'm like, isn't there like a sweet romance? Doesn't anybody write such a thing? And so I thought, you know, one day I'm going to write a book and it's going to be a sweet romance. And I loved Civil War history in particular. And I was writing for a newspaper at the time, and I ended up interviewing this gentleman who had a whole house full of Civil War paraphernalia. He was like the last in his line, so he got everything through the years. And he told me the story about his great-great-uncle's experiences in the Civil War. And I'm like, wow, I have read a lot of Civil War books in my life. I have never heard a story like that before. I said, somebody should write a book about his experiences. It's so unique. And it turned out to be me. Somebody challenged me and said, you know, yeah, I said, you want to write a book? start a book. Let's meet once a month for coffee and you give me a chapter of a book. I'll start a book and give you a chapter of mine. So we did that for 2 years. After 2 years, I had 24 chapters and I had a book. And then it took, the harder part is finding a publisher and such. But I found a fantastic publisher, Full Quiver Publishing, and they are amazing. They have been with me since day one. Since my first book came out in 2014. I think the reason people love this story, the Heaven Intended series, is because it's based on a true story for one thing, which people really enjoy. But the story is told in a way that every other chapter goes from the female protagonist to the male protagonist. So you are seeing the Civil War from both sides, the home front and the war front. And all the girls in these books, they all have some connection that we kind of find out in the end, but they're all about 16 or 17 years old at this point in the war in 1864. So every book starts on the same week in 1864, in May of 1864, and each book ends a year later in the spring of 1865 as the war is concluding and people are getting back and figuring, well, what post-war life is going to be like for them. But I've had as many men as women comment on how much they enjoy these stories, and people like from the get-go were saying, oh, this is like Gone with the Wind, which is a huge compliment. Obviously, like Margaret Mitchell is she's an amazing author, and I mean that's one of my all-time favorite books, and what a great comparison. And people have actually reached out to me saying, to consider creating either a movie series or a limited run television series on a streaming service. Numerous entities have reached out to me. I haven't reached out to anybody, but there's an interest in it. So God willing, we'll see what happens.
That's right. So. You mentioned God willing, we'll see what happens. You are part of the CatholicTeenBooks.com coalition or group of writers. Why is it that you made the choice to not only be an author, but also be an author whose books has that Catholic element to them?
Well, I will say I was a voracious reader as a child, and I went to a small Catholic school, and I think I read every single book in that library. And then I had to go to the public library and start choosing from there. So I have an affinity for this age group, and I don't feel like there's enough quality material for young adults in particular. I have one children's book out, but the rest are all YA. And so I set out to write something that I had wished for and I had wanted as a young reader. And I love this age group. I really do. I loved it when my kids were this age. I coached for many years different sports at this age range. I just think it's such a unique time of life where you can have positive influence too. You can be a role model for these kids. And I have so many young people have reached out to me. It's surprising. Like even some young men have reached out to me like, early high school age and say, I just love your book series. Like you're my favorite author. And I'm like, that has been a total surprise. I am surprised by how many people have literally said to me that I'm their favorite author. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like, what an honor, because there's so many authors out there, obviously. So now I feel committed to this age range. I have numerous books, that I'm in the stages of starting that will still cater to this age group. And there is a fifth book already the fourth book for the Civil War series is coming out October 7th.
Oh,
so really looking forward to that. That's already at the publishers. It's just being proofread and such, and the cover is being put together right now. And then there will be a fifth book in the series that in my head. So I know kind of where it's going, but it's not started because I'm in the middle of another book right now.
Yeah. You're talking about, writing books and being a role model for kids. And we talk here on the show about, books can be mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And I think a lot of times when people hear that expression, they're like, yes, absolutely. Kids from underserved populations absolutely should be able to see themselves portrayed positively in the page of the books. But I don't think we remember that there are kids, there are Catholic kids, there are Protestant kids, there are Muslim, Jewish kids who would like to live faith-filled lives, maybe follow traditional paths, traditional lifestyles, and they don't see a lot of role models in who are, young faith-filled Catholics in the page of the books. We see a lot of kids who might be Catholic, but they're Catholic in name. They might go to church once or twice a year, if that, and they're involved in all the angst that teenagers kind of go through, and they're not turning to their faith for answers and support.
Right. Well, I really think that this addresses, my book series really addresses that, particularly the Civil War, because these are young people. Like I said, the girls are 16 or 17 when the books all start, and the guys are maybe a couple years older, but every one of them is trying to be a better person every day. And they live their faith. It's not like they're necessarily evangelizing. They're just living their Catholic faith, the way they learned from their parents. And they, like the girls usually will have rosaries with them at almost all times. They go to confession. Even in the middle of war, the guys are trying to figure out when can I find a church and get to confession and such. And they believe in traditional values, traditional marriage. They believe in the sanctity of life. They're open to life. And, that's why I just really, and you talk about, is it a mirror? Is it a whatever? I've always been trying to live my life every day. I'm a better version of myself. And that's what I strive to have my characters do. And I hope that other people will see what they're doing and look at their own lives and see if they can do the same thing as well.
Yeah. I guess the obvious question here is, can a family, can a kid who's not Catholic also enjoy your books?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I hear from people all the time of all different faith backgrounds who say even though the characters are, Catholic, that just is who they are. They're not flaunting it. They're not holier than thou. They just are people. This is how they were raised. This is their faith tradition. And I think it's really been nice because people will actually ask me questions about the Catholic faith who are evangelicals and things like that. And this seems so foreign to them. But reading it just feels so natural. And it's like, it's not as scary as they think it is, or it's not as weird or whatever perception they have. So it's really nice that even those conversations I really appreciate.
Yeah. Well, I've always, being an old, almost 100-year-old white guy, I appreciate, that kids who are underserved need to see themselves, and books need to be the mirrors for them. But I also think it's just as important that books are windows and give us an opportunity to look at people who are different than us, meet them, and understand that while they might seem a lot different and maybe scary, when you get to know folks, we're all pretty much the same.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I agree with that in life in general, because that's one thing that's interesting about my books too, is that at the beginning of the books, the male and the female are on opposite sides of the war. Mm-hmm. So they look at each other's adversaries, but they learn to put their differences aside to find that common ground to save themselves, to save the people around them. So it's kind of how I look at life. I think especially there's a lot of division in this country with everything that's been happening in the last few years. But I think if you look at each of us, and if we each sat down and had a cup of coffee, we'd find out that we have a lot more in common than we have apart from each other. And there's a lot of common ground for all of us. And if you would actually just sit down and talk face to face with somebody, you'd realize that. And I think a lot of the division is artificial, where people are trying to put a divider between people and trying to keep us separate when we all want to just kind of meld together. Because when you look at it, we all kind of want the same things, like we want to have a roof over our head. We want to have enough food to eat. We want to make a better life for our kids than we had. We want the world to be a better place for our children and our grandchildren. I just feel like there's so much more than what we're being shown right now. And only the diversity gets highlighted, but really when you look at it, there's a lot more togetherness. And especially, like I said, if you were one-on-one with anybody, you could probably find common ground.
Absolutely. Hey, I would love to know where we can go online to find out more about Amanda Lauer and your books.
Okay. Well, all the books right now are on Amazon.com. Easy enough. If you go to Full Quiver Publishing, that's actually my publisher's, where all my books are, because I've been with the same publisher for all but one book. And then CatholicTeenBooks.com will have the Treasures book that you referred to earlier. And then I do have a website. It's being upgraded right now, but if you go to AmandaLauer.com, you'll at least have access to my blog, so I think people would find that interesting because I talk about all different kind of topics, kind of whatever comes to mind. Yeah, that's where you'll find me.
Awesome. We've had a wonderful time speaking to the author of Anything But Groovy and also the Civil War Heaven Intended series, Amanda Lauer. Amanda, thanks so much for being part of the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm just so touched. Thank you. And have a blessed and happy Easter too.
Through the magic of technology, we are going to jump from Appleton, Wisconsin, where we were speaking to Amanda Lauer. And we're going to go to Chocolate City, Hershey, Pennsylvania, to speak with Carolyn Astfalk. Joining us right now from one of the sweetest places on earth, Hershey in Pennsylvania. Our guest is the author of Come Back to Me and a number of other really fun and thought-provoking young adult titles. Please welcome to the show our guest, Carolyn Astfalk. Carolyn, how are you?
I'm great, Jed. Thanks very much for having me on.
You might remember that Carolyn was part of the Catholic teen authors who came together to create such a wonderful and, dare I say, magical Christmas episode. I decided to name their short story Christmas Lights. I thought it was appropriate, but it was they created this really wonderful story with a delightful twist and just a great message that families can share together. If you didn't catch that, be sure to go back in our archives and give it a listen.
Yeah, that was great fun. It usually as authors we work all alone, but it was so fun to collaborate on something together.
Yeah, that is true. It is writing for the most part is a pretty solitary endeavor. Is that something that you love about writing? Is it something that you kind of wish was different?
I guess on the first drafts I really like it because it's you don't really know what you're doing, so I'd rather just do that by myself. But there definitely comes a time where I'm looking for other people's suggestions and inputs, and when you have something published, it's a great source of support to have other people there to help you with that and to encourage you.
Yeah. Now, I mentioned that Carolyn was part of the Catholic Teen Authors Group, and there are a lot of authors who are Catholic or Presbyterian or Methodist or Jewish, but they don't identify themselves and write as a Catholic teen author or Catholic author or a Protestant author. Why do you embrace that title, if you would, of Catholic teen author?
I think because there was kind of, as our observation is most of us are mothers and fathers or parents, there was a gap there. There's a lot of wonderful general fiction. There's lots of great Christian fiction, and Christian fiction has its own marketing category. And it tends to be evangelical Christian or more mainstream Christian, but you don't see a lot of Catholicism. You do sometimes, and that's fine. I enjoy a lot of Christian fiction that's not Catholic at all. But I think we like to sometimes see ourselves reflected in characters, including our faith. So there really weren't a whole lot of books from our observation written for Catholic teens. Now, I hope that anybody, any Christian, any non-Christian, could pick up those books and enjoy them. But they do, most of them have a specifically Catholic element, even if it's a small part of the stories, that we hope the reader can identify with, that they can say, oh yeah, I go to Mass on Sunday, or I understand this, we do this, or we go here and we celebrate this holiday in this way, so that they can see their life reflected back. Now, obviously not all fiction needs to be that way. Fiction is such a great way to explore, people with differences, but it's also nice to have some that reflects your own life, your own beliefs.
You know, we talk a lot on the show about books being mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And I think most of the time people, when they hear that expression, they think, oh, yeah, so black kids need to see themselves portrayed positively in the pages of a book, or an Asian kid. But it's also important for Catholic kids to be able to see, or Jewish kids to be able to see their faith portrayed positively so they can connect with the characters, and also for folks who outside of that community to look in and to see what that kind of life and culture is like.
Sure, because Catholicism isn't a visible difference. I can't walk down the street and pinpoint who the Catholics are. And for some people, reading a book is their first introduction to what Catholicism is. I know some of my other books that are for adults that other Christian writers or readers will pick them up and they're like, oh, hey, I didn't know that. I didn't really know much about what Catholics do or believe. So it's a little introduction. I mean, the books aren't catechetical books, but the characters go about their normal lives, doing their normal things. They might pick up a rosary. So that's a great way, I think, for people to get a little introduction to what Catholicism looks like on the inside.
Now, I do have to take issue with you, Carolyn. There is one day out of the year when it's pretty easy to walk down the street and identify a Catholic. Of course, we're talking about Ash Wednesday.
Yes, that's true.
And I have to tell, when my daughter was younger, she's 25 right now, but there's a moment in every kid's faith where they kind of wake up and they start listening to what's being read. And we attended the service on Ash Wednesday, and the gospel on Ash Wednesday, it says, when you pray, do it by yourself. Don't be like the hypocrites. Do it in private. Go over there. And my daughter came home saying, why do I have this big billboard on top of my forehead? Jesus told us to pray in private.
Good point, yeah. It's funny, though. That is, I know I've been out in the grocery store after going to get my ashes, and people are like, hey, you got a smudge on your forehead. So, sometimes that's a good way to explain, oh, no, it just came from church.
Yes. The latest book that you wrote was Come Back to Me. Can you tell us a little bit about this book?
Sure. That book is a little different from my others. It's just a straight-out Christian fiction book, not so much romance in it, but about a guy, Alan, whose wife kind of kicks him to the door, and he's not even understanding exactly why, but he starts bunking with his brother, who's a newlywed, and his wife is pregnant, and that's all sorts of uncomfortable for him. And in the meantime, there's a mutual friend of Alan and his wife who's also kind of out of sorts, too. Her brother just went to rehab. She just kind of is aimless in her life. And so it sort of follows this Alan and Megan. They're not a couple. They're friends, but they're both trying to figure out what it is that's missing from their lives that their siblings seem to have gotten right, and try to recommit themselves to who they are, what they want to be, and how they want to live.
Now, I think a lot of people listening might kind of be shaking their head and thinking, wait a minute, Catholic romance novels? And just kind of say, what do you mean? How does that happen?
Well, Catholics do have romance in their lives, I hope. But I think sometimes I call them theology of the body romance because, excuse me, the way I approach their relationships is infused with that, with Pope John Paul II's teachings about what it means to be man and woman. And so they're a typical romance with a happily ever after, and the characters are flawed and they love one another, but somewhere in there I like to explore temptation and what's true and beautiful about human sexuality and marriage. So that's part of the story. And again, it's, I hope Catholics have romance in their lives too, as one of the joys of life, and something that God put on our hearts that reflects the love that he has for us. That kind of, that when you have that new love and the infatuation and you just can't bear to be apart from somebody and there's so much attraction, that's the kind of thing God, I think, feels for us. And so when we experience that, that's reflection of what love is.
That's beautiful. As you're speaking about that and speaking about that infatuation that we feel for someone when we first meet them and fall in love with them, and And to think that that's the way that God feels about us. And it reminds me of the passage in, I'm Catholic, so I don't remember Bible passages. I don't remember who said what, but I know it's in there. There's a passage where it says, God delights in you. And that word delights is so much different. We hear all the time, God loves you, God loves you. Yeah, God loves me. But God delights in you. When God sees you, he is delighted. That's a completely different image.
Yeah, that's a great word. We so overuse love in so many contexts that sometimes it doesn't mean a whole lot. But delight is a great word because you can understand that glee and excitement and just overall joy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we touched briefly on when we were setting up this interview was just how effective it can be and how comfortable it can be talking about some of these issues that parents need to be talking to their kids about by co-reading a book together, reading a book like your book aloud, because it gives families a chance to talk about what the characters are going through, instead of a parent trying to lecture a kid about you should do this or you should do that. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I think one of the best ways we learn is stories. We all internalize. I think even if we aren't consciously putting things in story mode, that's how we digest information and sort it and make sense of it in our lives. And I think that's why Jesus taught us in parables. That's why we're attracted to stories, whether it's in books or movies. It's a story that captures our attention. And so that's an awesome way, I think, of trying to come at a topic. It's a little less personal, maybe if there's something serious to address with your kids so they don't feel put on the spot and it's not about them. But if you're sharing a story, whether you're reading it side by side or you're reading it aloud, then you can talk about the characters. There's little distance put between the topic or the experience and then your child. And it's an easier way, I think, to address that.
Yeah. And I think it's a more effective way to address it, too, because there are all sorts of, when you're talking directly about something, usually it hasn't, both parties didn't sit down and just say, okay, we're going to have the talk today. It's one person made that decision or one person had that need. And so the other person might be a little bit uncomfortable. They might have their guard up. They might be thinking about something else, worried about something else. But when you're talking about these issues, through character, through stories, hey, we're going to talk about this story. And it just is a natural way to do it. And the guards aren't up. I don't feel threatened. I don't feel uncomfortable. I don't feel nervous. How am I going to do this? My daughter's going to freak out if I mention this. My son is going to do this. It just seems, as you said, just like a natural way for us to learn and discuss things.
It is. It's a very non-threatening way. And it also puts the whole experience out before you in a book. So you've got a beginning, a middle, and an end. So it's a great way to explore decisions and consequences, too, without having to actually live through them. You can see the results when someone makes a good decision and all the repercussions when they make a bad one without having to suffer yourself so much. Mm-hmm. So I think it's helpful in that way, too.
One of the things that just occurred to me when in talking to parents, a lot of times one of the things I remind them is if you're reading a story with your young kid, and one of the most empowering things you can do is to ask them, what do you think about what's going on in the story? What's your opinion? And I remind them that if their kid has the courage to share your opinion with them, it's never wrong. You might not agree with it, but it's not wrong because you're asking their opinion. What do they think? You can point out to them, well, I think about it differently. And I think that's something that's useful in this situation too, because when you're talking about what decision what do you think about the decision that Joe and Tommy made or Joe and Sally made? Well, your child's observation, your child's opinion might be different than yours, but it's right because it's their opinion. It might be a way to have that. I'm not really feeling it right now, Dad, but I don't want to challenge you. I don't, and we can kind of continue the conversation as opposed to it being a us against them and someone's going to win this debate. It's like we're talking about these other people.
Yeah, that's great, and that's a great like open-ended question to give somebody too, because you're not just focused on a specific matter with them, but that kind of open up all kinds of doors and all kinds of related issues and things that come out when you're discussing something. Like, what do you think about that? Well, and here's 5 other areas we didn't even think we were going to talk about that might be related or important. And again, like you said, there's no wrong answer to that. That's getting to know somebody better. You're knowing what's in their heart.
Yeah. I'm curious, what's the reaction been to Come Back to Me from folks who've been reading it?
It's a little different from my other books because it's not that straight romance, but they've really liked it. One of the characters that has I may mention Megan, her brother, at alcohol rehab, and someone's like, geez, I wish, people could see this. We've got this in my family. And I think it can identify with people that sort of are skating through life. That's what this character just does. You just the decisions are just rolling on one or the other. Like, oh, well, we were dating. Now we're supposed to get married. I guess we should have a baby. And there wasn't any thought. And I think some people feel a lot of social pressure to do things, or because they've just gone along with what's kind of expected with them. They haven't thought about commitment and what it means and what family life means. And so I think there's a relatable aspect there that people enjoy because it's very easy for us to all go down that road without being really purposeful about how we're living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So much to talk about. I just love this. It's books are just this way to kind of open up life and to start conversations about all sorts of different things.
Yeah, they are. And you can go places, you can have experiences you never would have otherwise. And the great thing is you can see that in movies and things too, but you don't get that internal insight you get from a book where you get into the character's head and you can feel what they feel and understand what they're thinking and why and their whole history and how it all ties together. So it's a unique gift, I think, to me to read a novel.
It really is. You were talking about getting into somebody's head. Shortly after I became a dad, I read Mystic River, which in the whole thing, a dad's daughter goes missing, and then there's a body found in the park down the street, and there's all the police are there, and this dad is going out of his mind. Is that my daughter? And just going inside that brain of that character, it just terrified me because I'm just a new dad. I never wanted to do it. But, later on the movie came out and it didn't come close to being able to express those ideas and those feelings that character was having.
Yeah, I think a well-done movie gets some of it, but I don't think they can ever quite get to the book and how things were so detailed and so internal. That's why I guess most people, in general, we usually say, the movie wasn't as good as the book because they're two different things. They can't quite compete. Mm-hmm. Movies excel at visual, but they can't grasp the internal as much.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And a movie is a 2-hour experience, whereas a book is a multi-day experience. You're with those characters for, I'm a slow reader, for a week or for 2 weeks. It's just and it marinates in your brain those memories that what you just read, those 2 or 3 chapters that you read today, stay with you, and you look forward to the next time you sit down with the book.
Sure, and I always think that a mark of a really good book is when it lingers beyond that, when weeks later or months later I can recall a character and I recall the situation they were in or some scene that really just sticks with you.
Mm. So you've made the point a couple of times that Come Back to Me is different than your other books. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about those other books and what readers can expect to find?
So my other books are more straightforward romance with a happily ever after ending. And my first novel actually shares some characters with Come Back to Me about a young couple, a woman who comes from a very strict home and really doesn't understand how relationships work, so to speak, and is really not confident in her own femininity and her value, who meets a young guy, Chris, who's just come from really not knowing God or anything to converting totally, and so they have to work out their relationship with her history, her dad, who's not really a nice guy, and their struggles. I also have a Christmas romance, Ornamental Graces, which I set in my hometown of Pittsburgh, which is a romance between a young woman who's kind of flailing about as to where her life's heading. She's just kind of hanging on with her brother's family and babysitting the kids. And Dan, the man in the book, has a lot of mistakes he is not proud of that he just can't seem to let go of. Oh. And let's see, and then Before Come Back to Me, All in Good Time, is a novel about a widow with 3 young kids who starts dating a man who is never married but has a very ugly problem in his past that seems to be hanging on. And then there's a little suspense element in that book as well. Right. So those are, we mentioned Rifle Hours, so that kind of captures them.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Oh, boy, Pittsburgh, what a great town Pittsburgh is.
It is. It's hard to get out of your blood when you've lived there. So I grew up there. My husband grew up there, so we have a lot of ties there. It's really my favorite city.
It's a city I visited and performed at many, many times. Great city. One of the weirdest things, though, I went someplace and they put, when they made my sandwich, they put the French fries inside with the meat and the bread, and that really confused me.
Oh, yeah, that's a Permane Brothers sandwich. Yeah, you got your coleslaw and your French fries right on there. That was the favorite of the steelworkers. They'd get off. I think actually the steelworkers, but also where the original Permane's is where the trains came through, and I think they had to grab food fast, get back at the rail yard. So just put it all between the bread.
You know, as we're speaking, and I had this flashback to a conversation I had with a woman at our parish. And both of my kids served as lectors and Eucharistic ministers when they were in high school and college. And this one woman came up to me, and she was just saying how much she loves seeing my kids up on the altar, and I'm so lucky. And she was really nervous that her kid was getting ready to go off to college, and she was really concerned because, oh, wow, you know, college kids are exposed to different ideas, and then they start questioning their faith, and I don't want that to happen. And my response to her was, that's great. We should question our faith. We should be thinking about what it is that we say that we believe. And if your faith is real, it's going to stand up to the questioning. And I think that your books are, and other books are, a great way to kind of allow kids to do that questioning in a safer environment, say, than sitting around at a bar or college dorm with, you know, a bunch of other kids.
Yeah, sure. That in the one book I didn't mention much about, Rightfully Ours, that really touches on exactly what it is. It's a coming of age story, so it's kind of that solidifying who I am, what I believe. And the characters there have to decide, okay, well, here's what mom and dad would say. Here's what the church says about this. Here's what, you know, X, Y, and Z other friends say about this. What do I believe? You know, and being able to investigate what all those people say and whether that's true or not. And then whether I need to make that my own conviction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a safe place to explore that.
Yeah. Hey, this is really wonderful. I know people are going to want to know where they can go online to find out more about you and more about your books. You have a great website. Can you tell everybody where that is?
Sure. Everything about my books is at CarolynAstfalk.com. And I do have pages on all my books. They're all in audiobook format as well. And then I do a lot of book reviews there on my blog, just a lot of Catholic fiction, a lot of teen books, whole variety of books. I even do a monthly blog post where I just list all the books the family's reading with snippets about them.
Yeah. Audiobooks. That's a great way to experience books with your older kids. It's just a wonderful, you're driving your kids around anyways. You just, you know, pop in an audiobook as you're going from place to place. And I know my daughter and I, when my daughter would be on tour with me, we'd listen to an audiobook, and there were lots of times when she would just pause it, and we'd have a conversation about what we had just heard.
Yeah, I've just started doing that with my daughter. She just turned 13, but we'll listen to books together, and while we're doing stuff in the kitchen, if we're chopping vegetables or sometimes we'll just get a coloring book out and sit and listen. And it's great. You're right. We pause it too and make comments about it and this and that. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, we've had a lot of fun speaking with our guest, the author of Come Back to Me and so many more young adult titles, Catholic young adult titles. And we've been speaking with the author, Carolyn Astfalk. Carolyn, thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, thanks so much. This was a great pleasure.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Vincent M. Kelly. He's going to be celebrating All People Are Beautiful. That is the next episode of the podcast. If you are the author of a fantastic children's book, we would love to have you as a guest on the show. Being a guest, it's fun, it's easy, and it gives you the chance to tell thousands of people about your fantastic book. All you need to do is go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the author's Click Here button at the top of the page. Scroll on down to where it says Be a Guest. We want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to thank our guest, Amanda Lauer and Carolyn Astfalk. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Alexia Brown, Hannah Pat Oboyski. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to join together to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very, very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.